This is the March 17th regularly scheduled City of Port Orchard work-study session. And if you would join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. We can start. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Well, we have a esteemed guest tonight, and Ms. Taylor is going to give us an update on government affairs and all things in Olympia. And so take it away, please.
Certainly. Does that work? Okay, I'm certainly going to try. Yeah. So good evening. It's good to see all of you. We are more than halfway through the 2015 legislative session, and I wanted to provide all of you with an update on your legislative priorities and the current status. In the interest of time, I'm going to just dive right in, and then I'm going to try and hit the high points and let you guys pepper me with questions rather than going through everything in great detail. So the first item is your top legislative priority, and that is securing funding for DeKalb Pier. You'll remember that we're asking for $500,000 in the capital budget. This is to accompany the $255,000 we received last biennium, and this amount would allow us to identify full funding for the project and move it forward. The Senator Angel submitted a capital funding request form in the Senate, while Representative Jesse Young and Representative Michelle Caldier submitted a form in the House. Beyond submitting the forms, I want to submit to you all that our legislative delegation has been working diligently to secure this funding. All three of them have gone out of their way to express support and to try and secure the funding in the capital funding process. In addition to their efforts, the Department of Natural Resources has submitted a letter in support of the project, which is a nice added boost. So we feel like we've really done as much as we possibly can to advance the request. We're now in a wait-and-see mode. The House is expected to release its proposal of the capital budget the week of the March 30th. It will actually probably be that Monday. And the Senate's proposal will follow the House. Our goal is to be included in at least one of those two proposals, hopefully both. If it is included in both, it is very, very likely that we will be in the final budget. If it is included in only one, it will be negotiated between the House and the Senate, and they will decide whether it will be in the final budget. So once we know what is in the proposed budgets, we can then indicate to you via our weekly emails whether we need to work on the Senate or the House as far as negotiations go. So that's the update on DeKalb Pier. I'll pause there and see if there are any questions about the project or the process we've gone through or have yet to go through.
Have you been in contact with the leadership of the capital funding committees in each side?
Yes. So on the House side, the Democrat leadership is Representative Hans Dunshee, and the Republican leadership is Representative Richard DeBolt. We've coordinated for communication to occur to both of those individuals. However, Representative Young in particular has met with Representative DeBolt, and I've participated in some of those meetings on a couple different occasions. On the Senate side, Senator Angel has met with Senator Honeyford, who is the Republican lead on the capital budget on that chamber. So, any other questions? Okay. With that, I want to move on to transportation. This is the second item that was on your legislative agenda, was supporting the West Sound Alliance's efforts to secure funding for the region in Kitsap, Mason, and Pierce County. I've attached to your report, it's the document immediately behind the stapled portion, the West Sound Alliance's transportation project list. So that is what we've been participating as part of that regional group. This is what they've asked to secure funding for. Earlier this session, the Senate released and passed a transportation revenue package and a slot of reforms. The proposal that they put forward increased the gas tax by 11.7 cents, which generates $11 billion. Of that, $4 billion is bonded to create an overall proposal of just over $15 billion of investments. Of that $15 billion, they did fund a number of projects throughout the state. In the West Sound Alliance list, they highlighted they funded all of those highlighted in yellow. And that was due in part to an effort by Senator Angel to have a number of these projects added in at the last minute. And given that the projects she requested were added in and the reforms passed, she did vote in favor of the transportation revenue package. In addition to the projects that are highlighted in yellow, there was also a component of local distribution revenues. The proposal allocates $375 million to cities and counties over the 16 years, and it's distributed on a per capita basis in the same manner that the gas tax distribution revenues are currently distributed. So if this were to pass into law, the city would see an increase in funding in your distributions there. It is slightly different in that the funding is not coming from actual gas tax revenues. It's coming from a different account, which also means it would be more flexible. Right now, you're required to spend your gas tax revenues on roads and streets. You would be able to also invest in sidewalks, bike pedestrian facilities, and complete streets. So it's slightly more flexible funds. However, part of it not being a gas tax distribution means that it would have to be reappropriated each year, making it a less reliable revenue source. That is a component that will be negotiated as the proposal moves forward.
So items 22 through 25 were not funded?
Pardon? Say that again?
Items 22 through 25 on this list are not highlighted, so they're not funded.
In the current proposal, that's correct. Yeah.
Those are all of the Port Orchard projects that we want.
Yes.
In addition to the direct distribution, there is funding allocated to a number of different grant programs, including the Transportation Improvement Board, which is a program that the city could compete for funding for in order to receive funds for the Tremont project. I will note that these grant programs were previously funded, particularly TIB, with a fee proposal, and the fee proposal that funded the grant program allocated more money than the $54 million that the package allocates. And so this is actually a slight reduction in funding if that fee proposal were to stay in place. However, that fee proposal is set to expire. So that is an item that will be negotiated moving forward. There's strong interest amongst cities as well as the Transportation Improvement Board to increasing this $54 million amount up another $30 million to make it $80.
Can I go back to the 11 cents or whatever it is?
Yes.
It's funding specific projects, so those will be statutorily funded projects, is that correct? I mean, they're gonna put forth a list, we want this much money, and this is exactly what we're going to do.
Correct.
Now, is there any money beyond that is not already dedicated to a project?
Yes. So the full amount of revenue generated by the 11.7 cents is not. It's not like the $15 billion is here are all the projects. There was also funding allocated to preservation and maintenance. There's the direct distribution to the local level. There's funding allocated to all of these local grant programs. There's funding allocated to the state patrol. There's a number of different things. About the total amount of revenue generated by the 11.7 cent gas tax increase is $11 billion. And of that, $4 billion is bonded. And that $4 billion that's bonded goes to fund projects. So you've got probably roughly $7 billion or so that's not allocated to projects.
And did you say that the $4 billion in bonded buys you $15 million worth of project?
But it raises the total amount to 15. So it adds another billion.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. Roughly billion. I'm speaking very rough numbers. If you want me to follow up with exact numbers, I'm happy to. In addition to the funding for the grant programs, there is also some local revenue authority that's granted in the proposal. Sound Transit is granted $11 billion in authority. That's short of what Sound Transit requested. They requested $15 billion. The vehicle license fee authority for transportation benefit districts is increased from $20 to $40. There's also a piece of legislation going through the process that would actually increase that to $50. But the proposal that's currently going through the process has it increasing to $40. And then there's the sales tax authority voter approved for the passenger only ferry service in this area, in this geographic area. So that's a general rundown on what is in the proposal. When this was released, you all received a couple different summaries from me on what was included. And in those updates, there were a number of different attachments that went into sort of the level of detail that Councilmember Ashby are asking for. I'm happy to resend those if you guys haven't had an opportunity to review them. This proposal did pass out of the Senate. It passed out of the Senate with a set of reforms as well. The reforms are outlined as an attachment to the update in this chart. Would you like me to walk through each of these reforms, or would you like, I want to make sure I'm using your time. You can either read through them or I can walk through them. Okay. And I will do so at a broad level, and if you have more questions or want me to go into more detail, please let me know. So the first reform is a sales tax on transportation construction. This is a proposal that exempts transportation projects from having to pay sales tax. That means that the dollar goes further. It also means that if that sales tax had been collected, it probably would have gone into the state general fund. And so you see a reduction in revenues in the state general fund. Now, those revenues aren't there now because the construction isn't occurring today. But the idea is that as the projects in the package move forward, the sales tax on the transportation projects would no longer go into that general fund. It would be exempt.
State transportation projects.
It is state transportation projects. However, the current version of the bill does apply to local sales tax. So if there were a state project in the city of Port Orchard being completed, the city would not get the sales tax associated with that project. That is a point that is going to be negotiated. The Association of Cities has expressed some very strong concerns, as have jurisdictions that anticipate very large projects to be completed in their district or in their jurisdiction.
I guess where I was heading with this, if we were to do Fremont, we would be obligated to pay sales tax on our project because
Correct.
it's not a state project.
You would.
But we only pay use tax on those projects. You don't pay tax on labor, you just pay tax on materials. But yeah, the state's definitely taking care of the
Does the
state.
state pay tax on labor in their projects?
Currently, no. Currently, they do just the DOT manual has the, if it's a utility work, then you pay tax on labor and materials. And if it's road work and storm-associated road work, you only pay tax on the use tax on the materials. So that's.
My question is that the same for the state as it is for the city?
It is currently, but this is going to change.
What this is going to do is exempt the state projects, leave the city as it is.
And it is only state projects that are funded in this revenue package proposal.
I understand that.
So if they take on, yeah.
Funds, for example, to do Fremont, we would be obligated to pay the taxes as we do today, where if that was a state highway, they would not.
Correct.
Must be nice to be control of everything.
Golden rule.
The next reform on the list is is designating 20% of the Environmental Legacy Stewardship account to DOT stormwater and culvert projects. The Environmental Legacy Stewardship account goes, or it's also previously been called the MOTCA account. It goes to address brownfields and toxic cleanup. A portion of it does go to other stormwater projects, and this would designate 20% of it. The ELSA account is an account that is in the capital budget. So this is technically a sweep of funds out of the capital budget into the transportation budget to meet stormwater and culvert needs.
When you say culvert projects, are you talking about the injunction list?
Yes, it is DOT-owned culverts, not local
That's
culverts.
based on the Fish Passage injunction list.
Correct. However, DOT has indicated that their obligation extends beyond the list that's in the injunction, that the injunction is where they're supposed to start, but the court really provided them with an obligation to repair all DOT-owned culverts. The third is a reform on ferry capital. It requires Washington State Ferries to use design, build, and fixed price contracts, as well as a number of other requirements in terms of contingencies and project budgets. The fourth reform is a labor reform bill I should note that the first one is sort of divided along party lines. Republicans have been supporting it while Democrats have been opposing it, with some exceptions here and there, but speaking broadly. And the second reform, similarly, there's a partisan divide. And then the third reform is agreed to on both parties. The fourth reform is also agreed to by both parties. It makes the DOT apprenticeship provision for new highway projects apply to only projects costing $3 million. Right now that amount is $2 million. It also makes prevailing wage surveys submitted electronically, and restores the helmets to hard hats program, which has to do with training more than anything. So that bill, like I said, is supported by both parties. The fifth reform is an environmental permitting bill. It does try and reduce costs in transportation projects by easing up the permitting requirements. There have been some who have expressed concerns with this. It does have more partisan support. Democrats opposing it, with Republicans supporting it. The area that's been of concern to some cities is that it says that their staging areas for DOT projects no longer need to go through permitting. Frequently, those staging areas are in local jurisdictions, and right now local jurisdictions would stage those, or would permit those staging areas. The sixth reform is adding congestion relief and improved freight mobility to the existing DOT mobility goals. That is agreed to by both parties. The seventh reform is an omnibus transportation reform bill. This has to do with accountability and transparency and how DOT reports errors and differences in projects. They have to submit a report for any changes in the cost of things or incidents that occur in the delivery of projects. So that has bipartisan support. The eighth report is improving project delivery methods. It encourages DOT to use a design-build standard for more projects and creates a design-build panel to advance the design-build concept. I guess for reference, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge was done in a design-build contract, and some of the other large projects were done that way. And many believe that it transfers liability away from the state and puts it more on the contractors. In addition to those reforms, which are all in separate standalone bills, there's also a component built into the transportation revenue package that says that if the governor were to impose a low carbon fuel standard, that all of the money directed to transit would be redirected to roads. And that is meant to be an incentive for the governor to not impose a low carbon fuel standard with his executive authority. All multimodal funding.
It's not just
transit. It's bike ped, and actually the way it's drafted now, it would also include the distribution to cities and counties.
How would a initiative affect that open bill?
It just says if the executive, I guess it wouldn't trigger that contingency, because the way it's drafted is that the executive would impose it. It requires the executive action, I believe.
So there's rumors flying, I don't know if you've heard of them, about an initiative going forward to the people to impose a term tax.
So this Senate proposal is being heard in front of the House Transportation Committee on March 26th. And the West Sound Alliance is gathering a panel of speakers to testify on the proposal, to express thanks for the projects that are funded, but then to also request that additional funding and additional projects be funded off of the list. I wanted to make sure that you all got this update, because your direction to me to date has been to collaborate with the West Sound Alliance, work with them, and that we kind of generally follow that larger regional group. Given all of this information that I've put before you, and I want to be able to have a discussion and ask questions, I want to make sure that my actions on the ground are consistent with your desires.
I'm not thrilled about this from Port Orchard's standpoint or the 26th district, so.
That's a conversation with Jan, though.
No, but I hope that we're not supporting the West Sound Transportation Alliance when they have this sort of funding for our area, or lacking funding.
So
I
the
mean-
West Sound Alliance didn't choose
Okay.
which projects would be highlighted.
Okay.
That was decided, but they decided what's on this list, but they did not choose. Their ask was fund this entire list. The legislature chose which projects
That's
would be
the Senate.
allocated
Do you think
funding.
the House is going to bless this, or?
So the House is holding this hearing. They have indicated that they will be putting together a proposal that they're going to build off of and work from what the Senate has sent over. They've indicated they're going to make significant changes. They don't think that there's actually enough money to fund all of the projects that the Senate chose to fund throughout the state. So they've indicated that there will likely be projects removed from the list. They've also indicated that the reforms are not all the reforms are something that they're willing to support. And so I do expect it to look significantly different when it comes out of the House. Now, the process that this is going to go through is no different than the capital budget, for example. The Senate has released its proposal. The House is going to do their thing and come out with their final proposal that gets all their votes. And then they're going to sit down and negotiate between the two. So that's the process that we're looking at moving forward.
I just want to echo a little bit of what Fred said, or just louder, please. I just wanted to speak to what Fred said, and my previous questions to you is when you look at the projects that came out of the Senate, obviously the large dollar item was the Belfair bypass, and that had a lot of support for many years outside of the West Sound Alliance. That's been a project that people have been working on for a long time. That's the big ticket item that's on this. The rest of the items are, in the $2 million, $3 million range. So my question was, is there going to be other money that we would be able to do some of our projects with, or at least a portion of our projects, such as Tremont?
So you would get your increase in local revenues in the local distribution. So you'd get an increase there. There would be the funding in the Transportation Improvement Board that you could compete for. I believe there's also funding allocated to the Complete Streets program,
Yeah, that would be something.
which is one that the So I guess to answer your question, would there be an earmark specifically for the project? No, but there's pots of money that currently don't have any money in them. There's pots that currently don't have money in them. There would be money in those pots, and you could go and get it. That's certainly not a guarantee. And I don't know what your specific increase in direct distribution would be. That's something we could look at. In the past, it's been about double what you currently get. Do you know what we currently get? We'd have to look at that.
Which amount?
The gas tax distribution.
$28,000 a year.
So you'd get about,
How much?
It's about $228,000 a year.
so you'd maybe get $500,000 more a year.
Or it, 500,000 more
Mhm.
total.
200-some thousand more for a total of around 500,000.
I check. I thought it was $500,000 more. That you double what you, that you double what you get, and then you. But that was all. That's also based on an old proposal, so I want to check.
Now, is that going to be stable for any period of time, or is that a one-time?
That so it would be that's a good question.
Nobody knows.
Okay, so based on what's in the Senate proposal, it is not a gas tax distribution. It is an allocation in the multimodal funds, which means that it has to be reappropriated each year. So it is, but I would say it is intended to be a continual. It is booked and accounted for as though cities and counties would receive that money every single year over the 16 years. Legally, it has to be. Right, legally it has to be appropriated each year, and legally it's contingent on that low carbon fuel standard component. Again, that's a point that's probably going to be negotiated. A lot of people are unhappy with how that is structured and would like to see it done different. Are there questions and feedback for me? I'm really interested. I want to make sure that I am accurately conveying Port Orchard's wishes in
I guess
Olympia.
what you spoke to and having stronger controls that make that, if we're gonna get $500,000 more in revenue, I'd like to know that we have the ability, if we have to go out and bond Tremont, that we're gonna have certainty that that funding source is gonna be around for a while, if we're gonna consider using it to fund a project. So I certainly hope that we would advocate to have some certainty to that funding source.
Okay.
My 2 cents.
Okay.
So the $40 in increase on the vehicle license fee, we don't have any increase yet. So this is saying, I think, that we need to go to 20 for 2 years before we can go to 40.
Correct. And that
You
for
can't just jump to 40 if you don't have it.
in the proposal as it stands now, that's correct.
Okay.
That I will share that the House is considering not having that 2-year period in there.
What else you got?
Have you guys had enough of transportation? I hear you're going to be talking about transportation a bit more tonight. I wanted to, and just being conscious of the time, I wanted to give you an update on sort of 3 other areas that you all have indicated to me are your top priorities, and that is liquor revenue sharing, marijuana revenue sharing, and Public Records Act reform. And again, I'm just going to try and be brief. On the liquor revenue sharing, we had a bill introduced, House Bill 1517, that would have restored our liquor profit revenues. Remember, we get liquor revenues from 2 different accounts, liquor profits and liquor taxes. Liquor taxes are appropriated in the budget, and liquor profits are dictated by statute. In 2012, our liquor profit revenues were capped at 2011 levels. This bill would have removed that cap. The bill is technically considered necessary to implement the budget, but it has not yet been given a hearing. The liquor tax revenues, it's hard to know where we're at on that, given that it's entirely contained within the budget, and we don't see budget proposals until March 30th. What I can tell you is that this bill and the conversations around liquor revenue have been more active than in previous years. We, in collaboration with AWC, were able to secure 50 signatures from House members on a letter asking that this bill be heard. We've heard from House and Senate leadership, budget leadership, that there's not a desire to try and make additional cuts. All of that being said, everything is tentative until we see budget proposals. So I guess that one is to stay tuned, but that's what we've been working on. On the marijuana revenue sharing, there has been an agreement between the House and the Senate that House Bill 2136 will be the bill that moves forward. Perhaps not in its current form, but will be the bill number that advances forward related to marijuana taxes and revenue sharing. To be honest, the bill is not all that generous to the local governments, in my opinion. It says that $6 million is allocated each year in the 2015-17 biennium, so you would get some revenue immediately. However, that is distributed out over many jurisdictions and wouldn't get you much immediately. A few hundred or a few $1,000s. It really wouldn't be much. Beyond 15-17, between 2017 and 2022, if the state collects more than $25 million in marijuana tax revenues, then 30% of the revenue generated and put into the general fund would be distributed to cities and counties, with a distribution formula that benefits those jurisdictions that make the most retail sales of marijuana. Under this formula, the one post 2017, AWC has put together some cost estimates. I will caution that these are very rough cost estimates. They're based on this bill that is still in the process. Under that, Port Orchard would receive $25,000 a year. I will note that that is higher than a lot of other jurisdictions. So if it's based on retail sales, y'all must be making some sales.
So the city needs to go out there and promote the sale of marijuana so we can increase that number?
The policy justification being advanced by the advocates of this proposal, which really are a particular set of legislators, are that the state is not going to generate significant marijuana tax revenues unless jurisdictions that have banned marijuana retail sales allow marijuana retail sales. And so it's structured to function as an incentive to remove bans, not necessarily to advocate for the sale of, but to remove the bans.
Do we know how much Gig Harbor is getting? None, because they banned it?
If they banned it, then they would get none. I can confirm that, but
That makes me a little happier.
but if any banned jurisdiction would get none, which is the reason they've chosen to go with this formula. Now, AWC has been advocating for a proposal that would increase the amount of money total that would be going to the local level and changes the distribution formula so it's a mix of per capita population as well as the retail sales. Under their proposed formula, which is captured in Senate Bill 5417, but that bill hasn't moved and has been, sort of designated as not advancing in that. Anyway, so under that proposal, the city would receive $144,000 a year. So I guess I put those numbers in there to show you that marijuana revenue sharing is being discussed. Yes, it is being advanced. It is likely to be considered in the final agreement on the budget. But the numbers that we're looking at are drastically different than what we had asked for.
I think especially the marijuana part, is really important for the city now, because when these things get set and everybody gets kind of into this is what it is, that's what it is forever.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so
And we've
making a lot of noise now is the only way you're going to ever get more.
Absolutely, and we have made that argument particular and used the fact that our liquor profits were capped in 2011, and every year since then we've gone back to remove that cap. When that cap was put in place, cities were encouraged to come back and remove that cap in future years, and that it was being done just because of the economic recession, and yet we failed to get any traction in removing that cap. So I want you all to, I mean, I really wanted you all to have this context before budgets are released, the House being released on March 30th, and really so that when you receive my email updates, when that comes out, that you are informed enough to then contact our legislative delegation or other legislators that you have a relationship with to express how important this is.
Fiona, is it helpful if we individually express our support to the legislative delegation, or would it be better if we had a letter from the council? For example, if we wanted to tell the reps that, we like these projects on Highway 16, can you push for them in the House version of the budget? Is it too late? As Rob says, has the horse already left the barn, or would that help any?
On the transportation piece, I'd have to think a little bit about that, in part because, and I think I've shared this with you all before, but Senator Angel worked very hard to get projects on the list, and then because she got projects on the list, she was obligated to support the package. So if the city's going to send a letter asking to have projects added to the list, that goes in hand with strong support for increasing the gas tax. And we've had that conversation before, and I think some of you have been of differing opinions. And I don't know that it helps advance the issue to send a non-unanimous letter.
The other thing that I would speak to with that, Fred, is we worked very hard with this West Sound Alliance to take it forward as in whole, and for the city of Port Orchard to come through at this point and say, yeah, it's okay, but we really want you to do ours first. That seems a little disingenuous to me of our participation in the West Sound Alliance.
Right, that was the basis for the alliance. The first meeting was, these are the ground rules. The ground rules are we're not individuals, we are an alliance, and whatever happens, happens, and we'll support whatever happens.
So our joining the alliance is basically saying that we should not contact our legislators and advocate for Port Orchard projects?
I think the message of the Alliance at this point is that they're supportive of the revenue package and thankful for what's included and what's highlighted on this list, and that they would like to see more highlighted.
Well said. I think if we sent a letter, I mean, some of the credibility, maybe not the credibility, but some of the work that Jan has done and some of the things that you're doing, I think we need to trust what you're doing and trust what they're doing, that they have our best interests. And if we send a letter that's kind of like a letter that's going to Iran and saying things, there's a certain, people get their crowd and say, what does Port Orchard think they're doing, or why don't they, they're doing everything we can, and now we're getting this pressure on the letter. And so I kind of don't find myself in favor of it, just because I feel like it's going to muck up the works that are already in place. So that's what I'm doing.
The only thing that I would suggest, Jerry, is that if we were to craft a letter that basically reiterated what Brandon has told us, that it still keeps us a part of the alliance. We appreciate what they've done and we'd like more. Now, if you read between the lines, Port Orchard is asking for more, but in reality, we're just asking for more projects on the list to be considered. And I think you do something like that, still get your point in, and basically it's advocating for what we agreed through the West Sound Alliance that we would all collectively do.
I think another option available to you is that there is this hearing on the 26th, and the West Sound Alliance is putting together a panel to testify at that hearing. You could deliver that same message at that hearing as part of that panel with your fellow West Sound Alliance participants. And I think it wouldn't be inconsistent to say there are a number of projects that aren't highlighted, including ones in Port Orchard, and we'd like to see them funded.
Yeah, I guess, again, I was just sitting on the fringe of those meetings, but if you deliver that message, I look at the West Sound Alliance as not a one-time deal. I see
Right.
this is
It is a
happening again.
long-term.
So you want to maintain the alliance. And
Right.
so if you did testify, I think you would say, Thank you all, for all the effort to get to this point. We appreciate the fact that the Senate has even, looked at trying to fund some of these projects, and we would continue to work with the legislature to continue to work on these projects on the list.
And frankly, that you would also be indicating that you would be supportive if nothing were to change, because you're thankful for what you have. They're supportive of a revenue package.
Which is consistent. Well, it's consistent with what we agreed to is that we're not all gonna win, but we're all gonna stick together and support this list. Next year might be our turn, and we're gonna get to support the Garner, Belfair, whatever, for our project.
Yeah, I think if you kind of went and spoke out, you may shoot yourself in the foot.
I will note that the region has done significantly better since working together.
Yeah.
When the House put together their proposal in 2013, the only project on this list that was funded, there were 2 projects that were funded on this list. It was number 21 and number 26, and number 26 was funded at a lesser amount. None of the other projects on the list had funding in the House proposal that was released in 2013.
And what I would say to item 21 is that the folks on the Key Peninsula have been working on Highway 302 as longer than the people that have been working on the Belfair bypass.
So it's a smaller number.
Well, and that's just the environmental impact statement. That's not construction, but Highway 302 is in desperate need of something
Yeah.
done to it.
Yeah, the 302 corridor's been on and off for years.
So I guess I just point that out to show that working together regionally has added quite a few projects to the list, as well as the passenger-only ferry legislation, and at the bottom, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge sales tax deferral to keep tolls low, which are kind of seen as regional components to help people get into this region and benefiting everybody.
I would like to have you and I meet with Steve Gorchester in the not too distant.
I did reach out to Steve. He would like to wait till after the legislative session.
Yes.
He's their organization's lobbyist this time of
Yeah,
year.
exactly. I'm saying as
Yeah.
soon as the timing is
Yeah.
right, we should have
Yep.
a visit.
The last item in the update, and I want to be cognizant of the time, is that there was a bill that would have allowed cities to charge for the electronic transfer of public records. Unfortunately, that bill did not advance forward through the past cutoff. However, there's an agreement amongst the proponents and opponents to have the state auditor's office do a study on the cost of providing electronic and paper public records, and using that study as a basis for putting a dollar amount or a cost amount for electronic documents in the future. So, are there any other questions that you have for me? I know you have a lot of items on your agenda tonight.
Thanks.
And so, no letter, interest in testifying with the West Sound Alliance. I got the feedback that we care about making sure the distribution is reliable if you wanted to bond on it. Is there any other feedback for me given all that information?
I would maybe throw something on the marijuana money, because when we weighed that, it was part of the discussion that we don't want to miss out on an opportunity if they do revenue sharing. It was part of at least my consideration for approving it
Okay.
as one of the cities, not to buck the state trend. And I think when we look at 1/5 the revenue potential, it's pretty big slap in the mouth for us as a body willing to go and take potential flack from the citizens to support the state referendum.
100% of the responsibility. And
You know, because we weren't going to take the risk of getting sued.
Right.
And we thought, okay, if there's ever going to be a revenue share, we know it's going to go to the folks that are paying or playing, and we're playing and we're not getting paid. So it's kind of a slap in the face.
Okay. Good feedback. I will carry that back. Okay. there's nothing else, I will let you guys continue on with your agenda.
Thank you. Thank you for spending time with us. We know you're busy. And if there's a extended session, you'll come back again probably at some point. Tell us why.
I will.
Okay.
You'll hear from me again before too long.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
I'm gonna move over here because had too many Godfather weekends. And number one rule is never have your back to the door.
Mr. Dorsey will be talking storm drainage utility. Thank you.
I'll try to be a lot more brief than I've been at the two utility committee meetings where we've had this conversation. So as part of the 2014 storm drainage gap analysis, as you know, we had the 3 ancillary items that kind of sprang up. We completed one of the items last week, which was the changing the code to make sure that a home-based business is not considered commercial as long as that activity is incidental to residential use. The bed and breakfast issue as a commercial was actually resolved in 2014 because it was consistent with the planning and the utility building for those facilities. The last remaining item that was requested to be finalized prior to June of 2015 was the request that we look at a credit for storm drainage. And I think there was some confusion by the general public, or there is confusion by the general public of the storm drainage utility versus storm drainage mitigation. And so in your packet, I have a 2-sided memorandum, and I'll just fly over the top of this, and if you want to grind in deeper, you can. So the storm drainage, I think tonight I'm going to go the opposite direction. Stormwater quality quantity mitigation. So you've got to go back to, you know, the early 80s when you did nothing. You could have 50 acres and you could cut every tree down and you would just build houses and put down 100% asphalt or gravel or houses or whatever, and you just put a culvert on the road and you were good. I mean, that is literally in the beginning of my career. And storm drainage, I've evolved with storm drainage. It was like I just was the right age, I guess. So when I first started, that's what you did. You put a culvert under the road, and if it washed down, if it blew out a wetland, blew out sediment, eroded a stream bank, and put so much volume down there that, you know, all the salmon eggs were covered up with mud. I mean, that's just what we did. We filled wetlands routinely. You didn't need permits. I mean, you could just do what you wanted. Then the pendulum started to swing, and we started trying to model. And so the idea was, you've got 50 acres, you've got trees, you know, so much rainfall hits that land, and most of it gets taken up by trees and roots and vegetation, and there's not a lot of runoff. And so they started to model it. They used the rational method initially, then they went to a 24-hour Santa Barbara urban hydrograph model that tried to better model mitigation. The key with going to the Santa Barbara method, it was no longer a flow rate based model, it was a volume based model. And when they talked about quantity mitigation, it was based on stream bank erosion, which came out of the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and looking at a stream downstream going to the Puget Sound. If you put too much volume down that stream, you would have erosion of that bank and you would damage the downstream. So we started putting in water quantity mitigation requirements that really said, you've got 50 acres of trees, now you're going to put 40 acres of hard surfaces, and so you're going to have to attenuate that volume and only release what was going up when it was 50 acres of trees. And oh, by the way, we're going to cut that 2-year storm event, because that's the most frequent storm we have, into half of that existing rate. So what you saw was from nothing on site to the rational method where you had a moderately sized pond, to suddenly with the Santa Barbara you had like very large ponds. And as the models continued to move, now we have really large ponds because the requirement is mandatory low impact development, and the pre-existing condition that you're holding to the half of the 2 is now pre-European influence. So they're not even going back to old second growth or anything like that. But they're saying before, you know, the white men were here, that's what you're going to release to. So that makes things much larger. So the point is that the storm drainage, the evolution of storm drainage mitigation, and then you throw the water quality piece, which is getting hydrocarbons to get on blades of grass in a bioswale, or some way of getting those contaminants out of the downstream. Those are all mitigation based, and those are, if you've got 50 acres and you're going to benefit by putting in homes or a business, you have to mitigate for taking it from trees to asphalt. And that's it. I mean, it's like with transportation, if you're going to put 30,000 ADT on the road, you're going to have to do a stoplight or something like that. It's mitigation for the impact of that development to the environment, and it's specific to the downstream. So that's what, somebody comes in, whether it's Fred Meyer or a animal clinic or whatever, they're mitigating as part of their development the impact of their drainage to the downstream. Now, the stormwater utility really has nothing to do with that. The storm drainage utility is born out of the watershed movement. Back in the 80s again, in the 90s, I'll say the late 80s, early 90s, you started seeing Dyes Inlet, Sinclair Inlet, Lynch, or Lower Hood Canal. The state started funding these watershed committees to look at non-point pollutants. Up to that point, the MPDS permits were ecology was only regulating point discharges. So in this area, you had the Bremerton Treatment Plant and the Port Orchard Treatment Plant. Those were point discharges of treated sewage that were under a permit and had a BOD 5, regulation. But as part of the watershed analysis, you determined that you had non-point pollutants. Urban runoff is the biggest one. So you've got all the catch basins, all the roads and the streets that are going into catch basins, and Port Orchard, they just go right out to the bay untreated. So you've got birds, dogs, antifreeze, oils, pesticides, you've got everything that's on that road. And when it rains, like it did on Sunday, you'll see a huge spike in the fecal count in the Puget Sound. That's from the urban runoff. Then you have the other things that were identified within the watershed of non-point: agricultural, cattle that are meandering through pastoral streams, marinas, golf courses, failing septics. You get out of the more rural part of the city or in the county, and you end up with a lot of failing septics that are near streams, and then suddenly they're failing not just on the shoreline, but they're actually going down Blackjack Creek or Ross Creek, animals. And so these non-point pollutants were identified, and marinas so the DNR started implementing marina requirements, like you have to have pump out records and you have to have pump out facilities in your marinas. Golf courses started to have pest and herbicide management and collecting that before it got into wetlands. The Department of the Conservation District started putting fencing around. And the big one was urban runoff. So MPDS went from point pollutant to then non-point pollutant but construction sites. Initially, it was only 5-acre construction sites that you needed an MPDS permit. Then it evolved into the MPDS permit that was for cities, the Phase 2 permit. And so that has nothing to do with the mitigation requirement. That has to do with, we have an urban area, we have all this infrastructure that's just dumping stuff right out into the bay. And so how do you manage that from a water quality perspective? It's not a quantity based, it's quality. It's educate people to not do like we did when I was a kid, and when we changed the oil, we poured the oil on our driveway to keep the dust down. That's what we did. That was in the 60s. It was common practice. Don't pour it down the catch basin. If you've got a small shop and you've got a floor drain and you're changing antifreeze and oil, you connect that to the sewer, not to the storm drain. Those are illicit discharges. Nowadays, car washes are an illicit discharge. Unless they're going into the sewer, you can't have that soapy bubbles with all those phosphates running down the street. So there's education and outreach of those sorts of things. Cleaning of catch basins is huge. They found out that the routine cleaning of catch basins is the biggest #1 reduction in the fecal counts in the bay, because all that stuff gets captured, hopefully combined with the particles, it gets in the sediment, and if we can remove all that sediment, all that contaminated material gets removed. Sweet streeping is huge. Keep capturing it before it actually gets into the catch basins. So it seems like, it's not that big of a deal. We're just going to sweep some streets, clean some catch basins, go and retrofit some regional drainage facilities, educate people. But it has to do with the philosophy of we're here to protect the Puget Sound as stewards, and what can we do for these urbanized areas that are already developed? How do you retrofit them in a capital project? How do you educate? That's where MPDS was born. And so the stormwater utility, I'll just say in general, is born out of the watershed movement, urban runoff, and how do you deal with that? And then the mitigation piece has to do with, you got 50 acres and you've had a massive impact of that downstream. And so they're not the same. So when we talk about trying to give a credit for somebody that developed it, that's like saying, I've just got 30,000 trips on the road a day, and I should not have to pay to have that light put in because the city has a signal system, that we're maintaining the signals. Like, well, the city's doing that anyway. It's like, no, you need to put in more signals to mitigate. They're different. One's mitigation based, one's more of a philanthropic. We all have a carbon footprint impact. And if you're a business, you've got the mitigation that allows you to develop that property. But as a continuing business, your patrons are driving on those roads. They're going to your store and they're leaving. And so that's the piece that is important, is there's a continued impact of that business on the urban environment. And so they're really different. And in a credit, there's very few jurisdictions that give a credit because it's mitigation based. And when they do, they typically only do it if somebody's doing 100% infiltration on site. But even at that, it should only be a partial credit because, again, that might limit the downstream of the impact of your development, but it's not addressing the continued effect of your business's impact to the urban environment. So I wouldn't think that a credit is reasonable because they're apples and oranges. They really are two different things. So
we did look at the utility committee whether or not we wanted to whether it made sense to change the commercial stormwater fee to trip-based, because there's more logic to that. But the analysis we did, we came to virtually the same number as the impervious surface analysis.
right,
it would be more complex to do it that way, and it doesn't really change the number yet.
Yeah, we came up with we created an impact ratio that looked at the impervious surface of the development as a ratio to the total trips that it generates. And it really basically said that whether you're a huge shopping center or a medium-sized, large impervious commercial facility, you have the same. It wasn't like there was this obvious, that Walmart was really just generating a lot more on an ISU, impact to the system, but it really, it was a 0.69 to a 0.67. So, larger the facility, the more cars, the larger the drainage requirement, the more impervious surface. It's basically what it's saying, it's impact. And that's why we called it an impact ratio, and it doesn't change. There's no, there aren't like any big offenders. It's once you take the trees down and you mitigate it, then you have this ongoing impact to the urban environment. So.
Well, I understand the impact ratio, but what I don't understand is that it looks like you're saying the impact of Evergreen Lumber and Walmart is the same. And my only question of that would be, what about the volume of runoff? We're not talking about the volume, right? We're talking about this impact ratio.
The impact ratio is impervious surface to traffic, and it was just an invented a metric.
It's a good metric, okay.
Yeah.
But
The impact of a Walmart or a Evergreen Lumber to the specific Ross Creek or Blackjack Creek downstream, they're basically mitigated by whatever drainage mitigation is implemented at the time. Evergreen Lumber has a facility that's about 10 times smaller than Walmart because they developed during the Santa Barbara method in the early, to mid 90s. And, Walmart or whatever had to build that huge facility under the Western Washington manual. So that's why that gigantic lake is out in front of, by, Wendy's. So to some degree, yeah, there are very old systems. I designed systems for 25 years, and I could take you around and say, okay, here's, Whisper Ridge up in Silverdale, up off of Dickey Road. It's 40 lots, and the detention pond for those 40 lots and those roads isn't any bigger than this room. In fact, this room is larger than that pond. But yet then I could go to the Harrison Hospital pond, which is only 17 acres, and that's a big 2-celled, 300,000 cubic foot pond, and that was in the 1992. So that was this urban, so rational method, Santa Barbara method, and then you could look at, then you get into the continuous model, the DOE continuous model, 2005, and that's where you get into the newer facilities that you drive by and go, wow, that's huge. So
the result of the Utilities Committee's deliberation said that you believe that I think it's 3,000 square feet is the measurement for an ISU. And you found that to be equitable, whether it's a single-family residence or a business. And the single-family residence, I realize, is one, but
We didn't do any analysis to residential versus commercial. Our analysis was if using impervious surface as an analysis or trip counts as
it's
an analysis,
they were the,
we came to the same conclusions. We wanted to make sure, because the rationale was when you cleared your lot, like Mark said, you performed mitigation.
right.
Okay, where this is benefit of the whole system, and it's the cars on the road that are causing, that were, our fee is maintaining this system, the drainage system, sweeping the streets. So we thought, well, it's more logical that we would look at it from trip count then.
Correct.
But when we did our comparison, we came to virtually the same numbers, and it would be much more complicated. It's out of convenience that we're using square footage.
But again, the bottom line is to ask for a credit from a storm drainage utility, they're apples and oranges. You've put in your system that you're maintaining that has to do with mitigation of your impact. Specifically, again, the utility is based on an overall education and awareness of the Puget Sound and the water quality issues of the Puget Sound. Basically dissolved oxygen, because of the increased fecal count, that creates increased biological demand, that drops the dissolved oxygen, and then you have fish kills. And so that's what the whole Puget Sound Partnership and really the EPA, DOE, TMDL that we have now, total maximum daily load, we've been assessed. Dyes Inlet has a TMDL, Sinclair Inlet has a TMDL. That's part of our storm drainage utility, is that we have to deal with the TMDL, and the best way to deal with the TMDL, which says we have to maintain a maximum daily load of fecal count through testing. You will do that by looking at your urban corridor and sweeping streets and keeping cattle out of streams and finding failed septics. I mean, there are things that the utility does to keep that number down, but it has nothing to do with mitigation.
Remind me, Mark, what the cost of a ISU is under the new proposals?
We have 3,000 square feet of impervious surfaces, one ISU. We were at 14.
No, we were at
7 monthly. Currently, we're at 980 or something, and then in June we're going to go up to 14 after we had resolved these issues. And that 14 then it's created the stormwater position at the shop to focus on ponds and catch basins and street sweeping as a dedicated personnel. And then we have the admin person that's focused on taking over the TMDL and helping Andrea, education, outreach, all these other pieces. And also that rate, by going up in June, it also started on a capital reserve fund for the capital projects. And by the fact that we're going to be getting that $750,000 towards the DeCamp facility.
Did we get that?
At this point, we are in the scoring. We scored very high. We just have to, if it gets funded, we will get that funding. And so that's 3/4 of that amount that will be grant funded. So when you look at taking that project off the list and only having to put $250,000 towards it, and the fact that we're already moving ahead due to the council's support on building that capital project, we're going to be able to look at doing more capital projects sooner than later, so.
How much is the city bill for stormwater?
How much is the city's bill? I have no idea. I sign invoices and there's about 80 or 90 of them. Because you gotta remember, we get assessed just like anybody else, other than our streets.
What is our bill?
It's a fair number.
I'd have to look it up.
I would have to, I don't know, it's,
It's not on our website.
I mean, I get a stack of bills like that.
I'll pull it out and get it.
I looked through the stack of bills like that on council meeting nights, but I don't remember seeing one for the stormwater utility.
Yeah, I'll have to look that up.
Well, remember, it's on the utility bills,
Yeah.
so,
Well, I see the warrants, but
yeah. Yeah, we could find that number,
Yeah,
but
I can pull that up.
I'd be curious.
So, next question, Mark. I know we talk about the impact of the storm water utility on the citizens, and we hear discussion, testimony even. Did you guys talk at all about the impact of the stormwater utility on businesses and in general, what that means to the city's health? For example, should we start experiencing businesses that fail because the margins are so small that the stormwater utility impact actually has a detrimental effect?
Well,
Which affects, their ability to pay into and jobs, and did you guys talk about that at all?
I'm not sure that the regulation or
Right.
the requirements imposed upon us give us that leeway.
right, that would be my response, is that when the Department of Ecology, or rather the EPA, implemented the MPDS program, and when ecology in the state was not moving it along as rapidly as they were supposed to, then when it was sued by the, what is it, Puget Sound Partnership? I think it's, and ecology lost for dragging their feet. Yeah, their action plan has nothing to do with the impact on the businesses. I mean, it's like ADA in the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice, when they created the 1973 Rehabilitation Act, they didn't care that it would maybe run a city, that Philadelphia would have a $500 million fine for not developing a transition plan, for example. Those are some heavy numbers because it's thou shalt, and it's unfortunate, but we're required to run the utility, and our minimum compliance utility that we started has to comply. There's no gray in it.
It reminds me an awful lot in the 80s when the federal government came in and said you will do secondary treatment with your wastewater treatment facilities. And as much as we argued and fought against it and said we can't afford it, and you're gonna run people out of your homes, they could care less, you will do it, you figure out how to fund it, and go forward.
So it's the price of doing business,
Band-Aids.
Well, I mean, we're kind of somewhat results-based, and the utility itself is our decision to a certain degree. I mean, we decide how much we're going to charge, and we need a certain amount of money to go forward. But how we get to that point isn't like just decided for us. We
Well, no.
decide that.
Well, remember, I would say that when we set up the initial utility, we did it based on the Morrison. We had to set up the utility, so they, in essence, developed our program, our initial minimum compliance program, and we embarked on that. And then we were able to get a Department of Ecology grant to do the gap analysis. And the gap analysis that we heard in 2014, starting about May, was a very thorough gap analysis. That was the basis for the rate. We didn't arbitrarily say, well, we'll just raise it. I mean, it was a very scientific study looking at our utility and really finding out what the issues were and where the gaps were. Just like on our water system, I know people don't like the numbers, But when you look at the quality of the report and the minutia that Katie Isaacson's getting into, she's looking at consumption. She's actually creating tables that show every single user what their consumption is, and trying to look at, you know, what's the best impact, or, you know, what's the best outcome for everybody, so that, you know, the small water users aren't subsidizing the large water users. And I mean, I can honestly say that, you know, these gap analyses have been really eye-opening at what level you could really look at the utilities to see really, and that's why they call it a gap analysis, to really see where those gaps are and fix the need for that. We're not, you know, I think when we did the other water and sewer rate increases, we were, you know, kind of at the very 10,000 operations, maintenance, and making some very broad assumptions. But on these, on the water, sewer, and storm, we've done the opposite. We've like really ground into the minutia to really understand the utility financially.
Okay, we're running about 20 minutes short, past our scheduled times for these two presentations. Just wanted to remind you.
Yeah.
Well, Sue started playing with this.
It's start over.
Mark, I appreciate what you've done here, because I think it's good education to people to understand the difference between the drainage versus the mitigation. And I know this came about because we heard from one of the commercial accounts who felt that they didn't understand what I think you explained very nicely. My concern is really that we have a system that's equitable and transparent, and I think you've certainly provided information that helps explain what we're doing and why we're doing it. Thank you. I know he's not going to be happy with it, but at least have an explanation of why we're not going to be giving credit for this service.
Well, and also, for my benefit, they were like, because when it was initially raised, it was like, well, that's his loss. So why aren't we considering that? I'm glad we went through this exercise, and now at least I understand. And hopefully we can share with the community that there's a difference between what they did and what we have to do.
Right.
Before we did the gap analysis and came to the rates that we did, we thought $7 was what we needed for minimum compliance. In the first 2 years, were we complying with the permit? I don't believe we weren't. It wasn't enough. We weren't getting to all the things that were, and I believe we would continue down that path. We potentially could have been subjected to fines.
We had,
Which is not how we want to.
when we're in non-compliance, we have to write a letter of non-compliance. And the concern isn't with ecology. The concern is with the secondary groups that actually go into those letters, and then they choose to file suit. That was where our liability was. It wasn't with ecology. You know, they may give us a $2,000 fine for. It was those groups that would say, "Oh, you're in non-compliance," and and they would sue, and that's happened. So that's our you know,
Worst nightmare.
worst nightmare. Our weakness is the secondary groups that are going to come in and sue. So we don't want to have to send a non-compliant letter.
And we didn't this last year.
We, in 2014, no. We're turning in our annual report, and we have no non-compliance issues. But we also had to do the catch basin cleaning through contract to get that work done.
So then, Mark, you're just asking for a decision so that you can write a letter denying. That wasn't official.
No, I think it was just basically the direction was we were gonna, the council said, you know, we'll raise the rate to $9.80, and then prior to June, with the 14 coming into effect, we were to hear these three issues and these ancillary issues. And I feel like at this point, unless there's direction to pursue it further, I believe that all three issues have been resolved.
Yep.
We answered the questions.
That's my recollection. The 14 would go in unless otherwise we took another motion.
I think implicit in that, though, is we felt that something would be communicated to the person, like Evergreen would get some sort of explanation, if not a formal letter.
I certainly can do that.
That's what I understood.
There's a lot more other commercial businesses out there, so.
But they were the ones that asked for it.
Yeah,
I wouldn't say you're saying go to everyone.
No, I'd say
Just, just answer the.
you know, put it on the website or something.
Yeah.
This is a good white paper.
Does that sound like the right approach for everyone? Send Evergreen and then put it on their website for other businesses.
Yeah, I can attach the memo and send a letter.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay, yes, thank you. Transportation for, this of course was, we've started to add it to every work study, just a general discussion, transportation. Anybody have any openers for that, want to discuss?
Well, I see that you have some charts up, Mr. Martin, but I did want to bring up one thing that was a discussion item at PSRC last week. I attended the Transpol meeting, and then later they have another committee, and I sat in on that committee, that is putting together the outline for the next federal funding cycle. Okay, and that won't be till 2017 or so, but this is to just start, what are the rules and the policies, how are we going to function during the during the next federal funding cycle. And an item that came up for discussion, and it was, both sides talked, absolutely no decision was made, this was just a vetting of information. But when they were talking about preservation money, money to take care of your potholes or whatever it is you're doing, preservation money for streets, there was quite a discussion on having, giving preference to those jurisdictions that had a TBD in place and were already maximizing their use of local funds. And I just wanted this group aware of that.
I guess my 2 cents would be to fund, make sure that they're looking at funding these legacy projects and not putting dollars into engineering and design of future projects.
Yeah, this was specifically talking about the preservation projects and not new construction. This was simply, they were talking about preservation. And some jurisdictions do not have any TBDs, you know, or collecting car tap money or any of that, and their roads are not getting fixed. And then there are other jurisdictions that have several different methods. One jurisdiction has a B&O tax, and their city council just moved their B&O tax to fund preservation projects. And so they not only are collecting car tabs, they're also moving their B&O tax to fund preservation projects. So there are jurisdictions out there that are doing, you know, finding sources for this. And that was just part of the discussion, and I didn't have an opinion one way or the other. I just wanted this group to be aware that that was part of the discussion.
Alan, is
Mr. Martin?
that something you prepared? Is there an overhead on that or a handout? Is it
Well,
in here?
I do have a handout. I didn't, this is what we put together. I worked with Mark and Nick, and this is what we heard you say the last couple of meetings where you said you wanted to have a discussion. And so, not to take a lot of time, but I did put this together. And what you see here is what we said before, and up in the right-hand or left-hand corner in the chart, you know, we've heard you say that you want to look at all of your projects in one process as a council at this meeting. And that's what this box in that left-hand corner pretty much says, that's the mission statement or the charter. So we went back and we captured those things, and that's your preservation and maintenance, that's your Tremont Whiting project, your Bay Street pedestrian pathway, the Bethel Corridor construction, and then those relevant projects that are in your 6-year plan that would really be decisions that the council's really going to have to deal with over the course of the next several budget processes. And then across the top of this is just a line with some marks and dots along the way. And that is broken up that if you go to a capital budget, where we just write a capital budget for the city, so that it's real transparent on what's in there, we separate the operating general fund, so we get some separation. This would be a biennial budget period. So you look at these projects in a 2-year cycle. You can roll the capital budget over so that there's consistency over budget years through your public works. And then across here, we looked at 20 years. That's probably how long it's going to take to move some of these projects through. And if we're going to look at cash flows, you know, in the future and different funding sources through a transportation benefit district and other funding sources, you know, we're going to have to look at that as a cash flow over a period of time, and we chose 20 years. And we've taken the best estimation of the cost, working with the engineer. We've had several meetings, and Nick and Mark and I have sat around the table and tried to come up with what we've heard and what the possibilities might be. And you can see we've listed what those costs have been identified that you'd have. And for example, $3.6 million for residential paving over 20 years is probably not enough. But that's what we've kind of started with, and you can all have a discussion on what the priority should be and what are the possibilities as we move forward. There's no calculation made on the change in the value of dollars over time. This is just in today's dollar. So you can see that you've got your list of projects on the budget side on the left. You kind of placed them out there on how you see you'd have, you know, your maintenance program is you know, ongoing. Tremont widening would start as we talked, you know, in 2017, 2018 into construction. Would have Bay Street pedestrian pathway. We've got certain re-engineering and right-of-way taking place now, and then you're going to get into the bulk of the construction in here. And then you get out to the Bethel Cord construction. We do have the Bethel Lind intersection now. We would go into an engineering phase. And then depending on cash flow, you're out here mid-2025 before you really be able to roll into that project. And that's just an estimation on what are the possibilities here. Your CPI, your regular 6-year plan is down here and laid out as those and how they would move across the cycle. And then we've added up what those costs would be across there. $4 million for preservation, the $17 million for Tremont, nearly $6 million for Bay Street pedestrian pathway. We're looking at $37 million totally into the Bethel corridor construction. Of course, we've already identified $700,000 already for the intersection. But anyway, the total is there at $65 million. If we throw in the 6-year plan projects, another $2.5 million, so you're talking about $67 million is what this would all cost you over the 20 years.
And I would like to interject at this point that, remember we had our original tip that the city had for years and years and years. And then 2 years ago, I believe, when PSRC was wanting to look at everybody's tip, because we had that whole constrained, reasonably constrained, and everybody was doing it differently, we broke our tip into 2 tiers. Tier 1 was reasonably constrained, meaning financially, and then the Tier 2 was unconstrained, and there's this, but the Tier 2 is still a big, huge wish list to some degree. As one of the biggest things that we did to develop this was and it's what we heard from council, is we broke it into 3 tiers, because Tier 1 reasonably constrained, Tier 2 unconstrained, but both Tier 1 and Tier 2 are part of the TIF calculation and presentation that you'll have next week. We then created a 3rd tier of all those other projects that are not going to be like the Tremont Phase 2 or, you know, the Tremont Phase 2, the Pottery Avenue widening from Pottery, Tremont North up to Melcher, and some of those other long-range projects. We took those off the TIF to get that number from what it was originally, you know, to almost cut it in half. So by going through and creating the 3 tiers and then really looking at the projects, including the McCormick Woods projects that are part of the Urban Village Master Plan Development Agreement. It basically establishes, you know, the TIF-based tip, and then the non-TIF-based tip, and then try to really look at the dollars that have already been into it and best projections of what those dollars really are, and then spreading them into, you know, the tier 1 is basically 2015 through 2020, and then you get into the tier 2, which then is the 2021 to 2027 or 2028 to 2035, and then the tier 3 is also 2021 to 2026 and 2027 to 2035. So really put a lot of effort into getting our tip a much better workable document, and then from that, you know, putting it into this graphic that where you now can see it, and then and I guess more information will come with the presentation of the transportation impact fee update, and also we've been sending out, you know, try to send out a uniform message lately. You know, whenever we get emails on transportation, I've created kind of a standard. This is what we're doing, and this message that we have on our website and what we've been sending out pretty much matches this. So it's all very consistent at this point.
This, to me, is very good. It's a good document to work with. My concern with this document is it really points out a glaring problem, and that's just the street repaving. And Ron did a quick calculation that this is about $180,000 a year that we can put into paving, which is a drop in the bucket for what we need to do.
Well,
And I also understand that the transportation impact fees are quite a ways down the road as far as the development, but I was sitting here thinking that we have specific projects on our list that we hope to be able to fund with traffic impact fees if we were to implement. But we don't have any kind of preservation, and I'm wondering if it's legitimate that you could take the arterials or main arterials and put in a repaving schedule for those and include that into the capital projects. I'm sitting here thinking about Tremont as I was looking at this, and gee, this proposes that Tremont would essentially be done by 2019. And by the time we get to the end of this thing, we've got to start thinking about repaving Tremont.
Well, I think that's where there are two pieces, and we're focusing right now on the TIF.
Right.
That, to me, what this says is we have to look at the TIF and the TBD. Because the TBD is where you're going to fund the preservation and maintenance. The TBD is where you're going to get the money to do mill and fills on Tremont until we get it built. And
Well, would that generate enough money to do that?
well, it's better than what we're doing now.
Boy, totally, bake sale is better than what we're doing now.
I mean, if it gets us, I think the number we saw was a couple $100,000. If we're already doing a couple $100,000. The thing is the TBD, if we get $200,000 from the TBD, we can't say, great, let's
Spend this money elsewhere.
let's spend this other money elsewhere. We need to marry it with the $200,000 we're already spending and put $400,000 or $500,000 into our streets. Then we're gonna get ahead.
Then we're gonna.
Right. We need to fund transportation.
Let me throw, I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, I looked at some of these numbers, and most, if we separate the three projects that are primarily gonna be grant driven, because I don't think we're gonna get grants for residential paving. That's just that's a maintenance, that's preservation, and I also agree, I don't think it's nearly enough. But you take $68 million, you subtract the $4 million for preservation and maintenance, and the rest of this is largely going to be about $64 million of grant eligible project type work, of which we would probably need 15 to 20% because we can't get it now at 10%. match. We need a plan that's gonna take that $13-14 million match fund for 20 years, plus the $4 million in preservation. We need to come up with $20 million over 25 years out of pocket. Out of pocket.
That's right.
I think that's where the TIF, that's hopefully, we're gonna get a presentation next week. Hopefully that's TIF, and TBD is hopefully gonna augment our maintenance, because we're just falling farther and farther.
It's
off.
basically $1 million a year for the next 20 years to do these projects.
Yep.
If that's what we want to
If
do.
you get grants.
Right, that's
And
a
that's
big,
the-
And that's if you get the grants.
And
and,
then I get impatient because I look at this and I look at what we've got for the Bethel corridor for construction. And we're not starting construction on that till,
2017.
no,
2027.
right, till over, you know,
will get
12 years from now.
grant-driven vehicle to make it down Bethel if we wait till
That's
next.
correct.
but remember what we're doing, what we agreed upon was, we decided that because the city obligated federal projects in 2005 for Tremont, Bay Street, and the Cedar Heights, you know, we've cleared Cedar, we've cleared the seawall, but we have 2 obligated projects. We have to get those built or pay back, you know, millions of dollars. So in the interim on Bethel, the pre-bid meeting is this Friday. The project's out on the street in all 5 schedules. Oil prices continue to drop. I'm optimistic at this point that we know that our schedule, our priority schedule C, which is the Bethel Lund mill and fill and overlay project, will get done this year, and potentially one of the other schedules, depending on pricing. If not, next year's 2017 will finish that. So the entire corridor at that point, it will be a, what we determined, a 20-year, and it's what the state's doing on their highways. They're not doing overlays anymore. They're doing mill and fills. It's a drivable surface. It'll get us 20 years down the road, and it's $1.5 million investment. I mean, it's a big investment. Next year, we're also going to budget the redesign of the corridor, so to try to get it from the $40 million plus current design down to a complete street at, you know, $33 million, and so that's a commitment. You know, that's a $750,000 commitment by the city, and then we also, I'm working now with kind of the KRCC group. We're looking at a county-wide PMS, pavement management system, and a county-wide transition plan. We were required by law, by the Department of Justice, to have a transition plan in place in 1992. And so we are, you know, and that's like inventorying and as-builting every one of our curb ramps and coming up with a plan that says, you know, here's a red, here's a green, here's a yellow. You know, the reds need immediate attention, greens are okay, and I'd say right now we got a lot of red dots. So we're gonna have to start replacing ADA curb ramps as well, but we have to get the transition plan, and I'm hoping to get that funded. The group that we met the other day here, I sponsored a meeting. We had the county, Paulsboro, Bainbridge, Bremerton. So we're gonna try to get everybody to join in on this. That could be a 2016 activity as well. The benefit of that
It's
is
listed right on the.
we would have it.
So Mark, we've all kind of agreed to talk about this for 15 minutes, and you know, you can see how important it is. And I think we're all in the agreement that we're in kind of a crisis mode, and we need to, that's why we're gonna be talking about it every time we get a chance, until we come to some consensus and build some solutions into how we're gonna move forward. And I keep finding myself going back to, yeah, this is what we all wanna do, and we're gonna get to this solution, but where I see the problem, and I think needs to be part of the discussion and continues to be part of the discussion, is the education of the electorate, the buy-in by the public for these vehicles that we're going to use to try and fund all this, whether it's the TBD or the license tabs or whatever they are. That needs to start right away. I don't think we can wait until a year or more and we figure it all out. Okay, here's where we're going to go. We should be starting right now, bringing the public along how serious and how important it is.
I think
We're getting
We
these
are,
numbers.
but there's other ways besides sitting here talking and hoping it shows up in the newspaper.
Well, we're gonna have so we have the first presentation on the TIF last year. We're having it updated next week. This will be a public process. I think it's important, so to answer your question, so does everybody here at the table understand the difference between the TIF and the TBD?
No, we've got this layout now, time and projects. And now what I at least need to hear are funding options and understanding those funding options.
And that's what's coming.
Right.
We're gonna get
Right.
the
And then we
traffic
can-
impact fees presentation next week.
Once we understand it as a council, then we can educate other people. But I sure wouldn't want to educate people with the knowledge I have.
In general, you can look at the TIF as a mitigation fee. That's development paying for development. That's what an impact fee is. It's not a resident, Jerry is not gonna pay a TIF unless she buys a new house at McCormick, and then there may be a cost of her house construction would cover that cost. But, the general public doesn't pay a TIF. That is a developer that is paying that TIF. The TBD now, that's different. That is whatever the council decides,
Well, that's a district.
That's a
You would-
district.
You'd be forming a district, and that district is for funding, raising revenue.
And that's the license to have.
That's the licensed ham or the retail sale or,
There's a popcorn.
And-
But, the TBD and license tabs are kind of one and the same.
Right. And in most jurisdictions, use the TBD funding for maintenance and preservation and match money, and they use the TIF money for capital projects. But you could also use TIF money for preservation, maintenance, or match. But-
Depending on where the zone is that you're
Yeah,
using. the impact
depending on the
fees for, right?
need and what needs to happen, so. But they're, just like the utility mitigation and that combination, the TIF and the TBD are also different as far as the residents of the city.
City of Bremerton, Rob and I just had a discussion with Marilyn last week about DEP. City of Bremerton uses it exclusively for street maintenance and repair.
And that's what I would advocate for.
Oh, I would too, if I'm sure.
Well, also to reiterate what Councilwoman Ashby said, is during the last KRCC funding cycle, and it's even been discussed at PSRC RPEC, is it may be a part of the scoring process or the screening process that if you do not have a TIF in place, you will score lower than a jurisdiction that does, because the issue was that the jurisdictions that were going for the same regional equity pot of funds, they're all competing equally, but some had TIF funding in, and they felt like they were subsidizing those jurisdictions that didn't.
It's almost like a consideration for a higher local match.
The other thing that I will, because I just remembered it, is another part of that discussion for preservation funds was, did you have a pavement management system in place? That was also a scoring criteria. Did you actually
Mark put
measure?
that one in there, so.
Yeah. So anyway, that was another part of the discussion, yeah.
Thank you, Alex. This is good work.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I appreciate us having the transportation as part of each one of our work studies.
Mark, does Bremerton have a payment management system?
They are the only ones that do, but my understanding is it's somewhat outdated. And so they're eager to update their PMS, and we're all eager to get a transition plan in place. And as part of our comprehensive plan updates this year, we're also putting a lot of effort into GIS, and we're getting some different things. So, and I think I reported at the last meeting, the benefit to that is we're going to be able to use that also from a transportation standpoint and have our transition plan as a GIS layer, and same with our pavement management system. So I guess I feel like 2015 is a huge year for the city.
Mark, with that pavement management system, well, we have $250,000 on here, but if it were countywide, would we still be paying that amount?
That was the PMS and the transition plan potentially combined if it were shared. Because remember, we originally was at 120, then it went to 150. I added in the potential transition plan costs, assuming that was a combined activity and shared regionally. So we'll see. That number, again, We only had one meeting, not all jurisdictions. Bainbridge was there, Paulsville was there, Bremerton, Kitsap County, Port Orchard. The port wasn't there. They probably don't need one for runways, so. Who else? That's pretty much it. So if we can get all those Kitsap Transit. Kitsap Transit wasn't there.
We weren't invited.
No, okay. No, they don't really have a paper. They drive on other people's roads.
Okay, each one of our items will get a little further behind, minus 35 minutes behind. We done with the transportation discussion? All right, number 4, population employment rate.
Okay, I'll talk fast here. This is an issue that the Economic Development Committee had recommended that come forward for full council discussion. I actually don't have a whole lot to say about this. My understanding is that KRCC has been discussing the allocations that were previously adopted and whether they are consistent or compatible with the current trends in population and employment growth. There was some discussion at the committee level, and I think I would like to turn it over to the committee just to maybe discuss what's happening at KRCC a little bit more.
Yeah, and I'll be real quick on this, in that at the last KRCC meeting, let me go back. There, in July, last July, KRCC approved the employment and population allocations for the next 20 years. That was done. And then, if you'll remember, there was some discussion a couple months ago that the county may need us to take some of the population. We discussed that and said we would be willing to take up to 2,000. When that went back for further discussion, it was discovered that there was a Scribner's error in the original form that we were given. And when the county corrected the Scribner's error, what they really needed to do was move 1,000 population from their central Kitsap UGA to their Silverdale UGA. So it took us completely out of it. That came forward to KRCC, and there'll be a public hearing on it on the 7th, April 7th. But that opened another discussion within KRCC, and they had talked about doing a work study to review those allocations based on actual numbers. So what I did at that point, I contacted Nick and I said, can you give me the city's actual numbers? I put them in a little Excel spreadsheet, and I looked at our actual employment growth and our actual population growth over the last 20 years by number and by percentage. And then I looked at that yearly, but then I also looked at a total for the full 20 years. And I compared it to the allocations that we were given. And it all seemed reasonable. It seemed like the allocations we were given was very close to our actual growth over the past 20 years. So all I did was come forth to economic development and say, when KRCC goes into this workshop, I'm going to be neutral on Port Orchard's allocations. And I just wanted to share that with everyone, that was the analysis I did and where I came from on that. And these numbers are important because we're already working on a comprehensive plan based on these projections, and it's going to be difficult for us to move away from those going forward.
Correct. We, in our water system plan that we're working on, our sewer system plan, our transportation plan, all are relying on the assumptions in these allocations. And so if those change, we're spending money on analysis on which the underlying assumptions would change.
Right, and I don't believe KRCC ever intended to change the assumptions. They just wanted to do a review and make sure the actual information was consistent with the projections.
I'm fine with it. And by the way, she brought the same up, and Nick seemed to confirm the work she had done, which I suspect it's gonna be accurate. I mean, after all, she did numbers her whole life, so I'm okay with it.
Thank you for the update.
Okay, Mr. Bond, how about the logo?
So I'm going to pass out, we received our deliverables on the logo and wayfinding sign. I only have the logo here tonight because we're still reviewing the wayfinding packet. It's quite a bit thicker. The issue we have at this time, and this document is almost complete, and the color may be a little off with the copier that we're using. It's not calibrated. But we have two questions. First of all, we're wondering if the new logo should be used in Discover Kitsap, and so we're looking for, I guess, a nod of approval or a motion, however you want to handle it.
What I brought tonight was a couple copies of last year's Discover Kitsap. It's a publication that's done by Sound Publishing, and it's distributed in a lot of different ways, but primarily on the fairs. The back two pages, inside pages, this page and this page have been secured again. This page is going to be Explore Port Orchard and the 125th City of Port Orchard anniversary celebration. And then Fathoms of Fun uses this one. If you will notice down in the small corner is the little bug that was used last year. And that's why I brought this. It was a bug that was created by the Chamber of Commerce exclusively to use in some joint marketing material. And my request, or the request coming forward from Explore Port Orchard, is they would like to use this mark in that publication, in that little corner piece. And my thought, and what I brought forward even before this was developed, that we would like to see a connection with our marketing that's done outside the area. And again, I'm using the ferries, so that the public sees this. They get to Port Orchard, they see our wayfinding signs, and they know they're in the right place. You know, it's just a connection. And so that's what we were bringing forward tonight, because these ads are being in the process of being put together and developed, and we need to know whether or not we can use this bug or if we're going to use the other.
So I guess if everybody's okay with it, you can either nod your head, or I don't know if you want to vote. Is everybody? Okay, it sounds like it. So the second part of the discussion, and this is a late addition to the packet, but I passed out a policy that the city of Denver uses on their logo, and I guess they have a mark and a couple of other symbols, but they have a policy for its use. And I would like to propose that we bring something similar to this forward for Port Orchard to formally adopt that concerns the use of the logo in the future. And I think the key, this is just one page of their whole document, but the key piece of this is that the city has pre-approved certain organizations to use this, and in their case it's Visit Denver, the Convention and Visitors Bureau, the Downtown Denver Partnership. And so my thought would be that we want to give permission to potentially Visit Kitsap, the POBSA, and a couple of other organizations, and I need help identifying what those are so that I can bring you a formal policy. And then that for any other entities that want to use this, the city of Denver, what they do is they require that group to sign a licensing agreement with the city, and we could even probably pull Denver's agreement and essentially make it our own for very little cost. And that would give us some control over the use of our logo, and if somebody wants to use it, they have to come forward and ask for permission.
So is their logo trademarked or copyrighted, or?
I haven't looked into that yet. I only got this afternoon, but we have talked about copywriting it, and it sounds like there's a little bit of paperwork, and you know we'll continue to explore that. But right now, I think the main thing is maybe bringing forward a proposal that looks similar to this.
My 2 cents would be any nonprofit that we're putting LTAC funds to, why shouldn't we be allowing them to use our logo?
I would agree. I'd agree with that, but
They're using sort of advertising only though, right? It's not for switching events, or is it?
Well, yeah, and I think there's potentially the issue of if it's just a one-time event, you know, is the city formally participating in that event, or are we only using this for marketing? And I would have to look at the list of LTAC recipients to know, what's complete, but I have a good idea of most of the core organizations, and there's maybe a few more that I'm not aware of, but maybe what I'll do is I'll bring this forward. I'll leave blank the list of organizations, and I'll bring you the list, and we'll make sure that everybody that's on there, the council wants to include.
Mr. Martin had a good point. He said that we need to be careful that, as LTAC changes over time, it would have to be brought forward each year if we were going to allow them.
And I would amend the policy in that
In the
case.
contract.
Yeah,
That's why we
it
have
would
licensing.
belong in the contract that you sign each year with the organization. You
I
just
know
say
you
that-
want to list the specific organizations, it's a broad policy that says if you're nonprofit and you're receiving city funding from LTAC,
What about if someone was having an event downtown and they're not an LTAC recipient, but they're having an event on our waterfront? The Chris Craft Rendezvous is an example. Would we want, now the Chris Craft doesn't do anything through Port Orchard, so they're not, we have no agreement with them, that's strictly with
Well,
the
the
port.
cruise.
But the cruise also receives LTAC funds.
Oh,
But I was trying to think of someone that didn't receive LTAC funds, that had an event downtown, but they are filling out the application, they're providing us with, insurance, and we're being, made a loss payee on their insurance. Would we want to consider allowing them to use it in marketing? Again, it's the connection thing. And I don't have an opinion, I'm just bringing it forward.
I would think more case by case versus maybe it's not something we want to promote or support.
Well, you got Hogfest coming up, maybe that's. a
That,
good
I
example.
was thinking of that. I would lean towards, if it's for the betterment of the city, sure, why not let somebody use it? But if they're gonna use the logo for profit away from a downtown city event, the answer's gonna be no.
I think we can bring a couple of alternatives forward, but I think this is generally the good approach for how we should handle this in the future, and so I'll work with the attorney to draft something that would be most likely a resolution that you could adopt as a policy, along with all the standards that are in the logo packet as far as the use of the logo and all the requirements for how you can and can't use it. And I will note there is just one or two small typos in there, and so I've got to get those cleaned up. I hadn't gotten the corrected version back and didn't have it in time for this meeting. So, and then the wayfinding signs, they look really good. I'm sorting through the location and which way arrows are pointing and making sure that everything's correct. And so hopefully by next work study I can bring that forward and show it to you and give you the details.
That'll be the full packet.
Nick, I got a question, on the terms you're using, the phraseology that you're using. Is this, first of all, is this Denver's logo that they use on their letterhead, or is this some kind of their tourism?
There's a whole packet. I only printed one page, but it's a logo for tourism. It's a logo on their letterhead.
This is their city logo.
Not this one.
No.
I brought the
No.
whole packet, and they actually describe the difference between their letterhead packet and the packet they use for tourism.
And they have a stamp as well that's
Yeah, and what you
gives the
should
seal.
use for emails and for business cards, it's really.
I like ours better.
So the reason I was asking that is because I guess we can all remember that when we went forward with the wayfaring signs, we wanted to have a logo that kind of went on these signs to, shout out Port Orchard. It was kind of it's not like rebranding the city, but it was like having, a logo
Yeah.
for the signs. So I'm still assuming that this isn't our city logo as
No.
much as it's
No,
just
it's
our tourist
Exactly. Yeah, we could have done that. It probably would have doubled the total price to include letterhead and the side of the police cars and everything. But we only looked at the marketing
Yeah, I think,
aspect. and the
didn't we all
wayfinding.
agree, though, we weren't gonna change this?
Yeah.
We agree that the
Yeah.
city's logo is
So
what's on the flag.
Denver did a more comprehensive project than we
This
did.
is something different.
This
Okay.
is just a kind.
Because when you just say logo and you don't
Correct.
say and differentiate it from the city's logo, and then I started going, well, okay, what exactly are we talking about?
Yeah, I understand.
So we need to come up with a different name to call it, like our tourism logo or our wayfaring sign logo, or, anyway,
Yeah.
that's the only thing I was questioning.
city's copyrighted logo.
All right. Okay, we're Foot Ferry. And Ms. Reinerson is over at Spokane. I believe she's in Spokane at a meeting for clerks training. And so she was hoping to get some more input from you folks about the Foot Ferry schedule. And she's included a schedule. She included several options here, option A and option B, towards the back of your packet. This piece of paper.
Well, again, this was discussed at Economic Development last week, and we had several different points of discussion on it. And I don't know if you can see Brandy's that well, but if we were to maintain the same hours of extended service as we had last year, we need full support and full funding that we had last year from the various organizations. When we as a committee analyzed the actual ridership, the Friday and Saturday evenings for 2015, as Brandy put numbers together, would cost about $8,774. In 2014, there were 122 passengers on Friday night. There were 276 passengers on Saturday night. Total for the whole summer. The fares collected on Friday and Saturday nights totaled $707.40.
Just take those times two.
So that, if you take the fares away from if the fares were consistent, and if you took them away from the potential cost or the estimated cost of $8,700, basically Friday and Saturday nights are an $8,000 bill. The Economic Development Committee kind of is what Brandy suggested here, is that we either do option A, which mirrors what we did last year, with the understanding we need full funding from everyone, and we have to hold for the same fare box recovery. Or we go with a second option, which is whatever Friday and Saturday evenings look like on holidays. We would basically do the holiday service and Sunday service. And with that, the cost is reduced significantly to us, or for the cost of the program is reduced significantly. And we kind of wanted Brandy needed a sense from council before she moved the ideas forward to our partners, which is basically the city of Bridgeton, the port, and Kitsap County.
For obvious reasons, I'm recusing myself from this discussion.
Yeah.
Well, I would just say, Beck, that we kind of knew 2 or 3 years ago when we started talking about this, and when it was proposed, and we were trying to figure out, give it a chance on the Friday night and the Saturday night thing, and one of the comments I think I made at that time, well, what would success look like? And I think, I still don't know, but I do know what failure looks like, and it's this. It's Friday and Saturday night, it's just not cutting it. We don't even know which way the people are going. We don't even know if these are just people coming over and spending money, or if they're just people going to work or coming back. I mean, we don't know. There's so much we don't know, and there's so little benefit that I think that it would be obvious to me that option B would be our best choice. So just saying.
Before I participate, I work at Kitsap Transit, but I sign no contracts with Kitsap Harbor Tours or any other entity. That's John's job. That's why he recused himself. Does anybody have a problem if I participate in this discussion?
No problem.
Okay. I agree with Jerry. Quick math is the city's paying $20 a trip on Friday, Saturday night. And I don't see where any kind of economic development is gonna support $20 a passenger for the extra 30, 40 minutes or whatever they're hanging out downtown. I don't even see how they can pay $20 downtown per person. We're not getting anything back for our businesses at $20 subsidy.
Well, and another thing is that when this was being proposed way back when, Don Ryan was before us, he was suggesting that this would help the market and some of the downtown businesses. As it turns out, the market closes before this even gets started, so they're not affected. And I remember talking to Daryl Baldwin about it, MoonDogs, and he, being one of the only businesses that would benefit, actually said he did not think that this was the good thing. So that was an interesting observation that he made. He just said, you know, by the time some of these guys need to go home, I have to put them on a cab. So it wasn't going to be beneficial to have the ferry for that reason. So, and as we see, ridership is extremely low.
Well, I was just gonna say, even the Sunday thing is not very profitable. I mean, it's not profitable at all. I mean, it's
The whole
illusory.
thing's not
$16 a round trip subsidized on
It's
Sundays.
not
I
profitable.
figured it out.
It's not profitable, any way you look at it.
Well,
We're
the
subsidizing
Labor Day weekend
every
pays for
single
itself
ride.
and actually kicks money back into the Labor Day weekend is good. There's actually 5 events that are actually, or 5 days that are actually somewhat reasonable to do.
One of our partners, I believe, would drop out.
Right.
We didn't fund the
Bremerton,
Sunday.
because of the farmer's
Because
market.
they want the Sunday service.
Right.
And
And
they're,
that's why I say
they're
option
an
B
equal
is.
partner to us. I agree, I think option B is a better solution, but I think we need to keep this. Does it make sense, though, on these festival weekends to add any hours if we're gonna adjust? I mean, the festival weekends is when it's
Makes sense.
really hopping, and does it make, if we're gonna reallocate these dollars and maybe we can keep the county involved, does it make sense on those festival weekends to even do a little bit more?
What I have experienced last year is some of the sponsors of the festivals request certain hours, such as the cruise. We start earlier on their Sunday. They've asked us to start earlier on their Sunday. The Fathoms of Fun on a couple of their events ask us to adjust the hours for the days, maybe it's parade day, whatever it is. And I know there are a couple of events in Bremerton, at least Brandy shared this at the Economic Development Committee, was that there are a couple of events in Bremerton on a Friday or a Saturday evening that was important for them to have extended hours for.
But it's part of a festival.
But it's part-
not,
it's-
not a every Friday deal.
Correct, it's
Promoted
something
as part
going
of
on
the
there,
festival.
yes, yes.
It goes back somewhat to our original intent when we did this. That was, it really made a lot of sense to make sure the ferry was running so that our events would have a chance to be, come and
We tried,
enjoy.
we tried the Friday and Saturday night.
Yeah.
I don't see it's.
The other thing that I just want to say out loud, maybe for Danny's benefit or someone's benefit, is that the last ferry leaves Port Orchard at 8:30 on Friday nights, and it leaves Port Orchard at 7:30 on Saturday evenings. Most of our businesses downtown, except for the eateries, except for our restaurants, are closed on Friday before 8. So we're still capturing the bulk of the downtown businesses with a half hour to spare. And the same on Saturday. Very few of our businesses downtown on Saturdays are open past 6 or 7. And that last ferry leaves at 7:30. So, and then coming back, it's 8:45 and 7:45.
I think we're losing an opportunity, though, to grow the ferry ridership, which has not been promoted since you left the POBSA. We know that last year they didn't promote it. Even Bobby Stewart, who's only open till 8 on Fridays, believes that you need to keep standard hours so people get used to your hours. Last year we could say it's extended between Memorial Day and Labor Day, and people knew that as a marketing ploy. We were trying to get the Hampton Inn to send their residents over here to eat and then go back. But what really worries me is if we do option B, we are not going to get the same funding from the Port of Bremerton, the city of Bremerton or even the county. And Randy said that we'd be paying a lot less. I think we're losing an opportunity where our partners will no longer want to fund this.
Well, if that's the case, if all of our partners want option A, then I think we need to consider option A. Because if option B is gonna cost us more, because our partners don't want option B, and it's gonna cost us a larger, our percentage, our share goes up, then we need to discuss this again.
And I'm not sure we're gonna get the port support anyways, because at least one port commissioner is very vocal that this should be a Kitsap Transit funded operation 100%.
You know, they've always said that.
So, you know, I'm not gonna, I wouldn't count on the port until we see the check.
We have to at least ask them to find out if we get the money, and right now, I'm not sure if Brandy may feel that she needs to even ask.
I think we need to have a dialogue.
Yeah, I think what she's looking for is some pretty good direction for her to go out and ask, or not to ask, or ask for B instead of A. What exactly?
I would say ask for B on my part. And one of the reasons, I hear what you're saying, that we'd actually save a little money by going with A if everybody's in, if it's an all-in. But that's still a heck of a lot of wasted money. If it's not for our citizens, it's for citizens in Kitsap County and in Bremerton. That's a waste of money, because that is just a loser deal, that Friday, Saturday night thing. I mean, there was days, you guys all saw it, there's days in there where there's only 2, and one day there was nobody. It's just a loser, and we should consider the fact that some citizens somewhere are got a loser deal, and we shouldn't be just trying to prop it up just so we're going to pay a little bit. We should try and do the right thing, and I think the right thing is probably option B.
Is there a reason we're not asking for county to fund something in option B?
The county, as I understand it, Nick and Fred and Jeff were all at the economic development meeting, is the county is willing to participate, but they want to be the last in. Okay, so that if we've spent all of Port Orchard's money, we've spent all of Bremerton's money, and we've spent all of the port's money, then Kitsap County will.
What's the amount they
So
agree
if the
to?
port drops out, the county will pick up that 1,000, potentially.
I'm not sure.
We're not sure of that. We haven't got that agreement this
Right,
year.
and I'm
but-
not sure that the port is necessarily not going to participate. The port may participate at the same amount or a lesser amount, but it's my experience from my involvement with the Port Orchard Bay Street Association. The last 2 years, they have done a complimentary ticket for a foot ferry ride. And the POBSA doesn't care when they use it during regular hours. And POBSA reimburses Kitsap Transit for that, or they use it on the extended hours. And POBSA pays that to Harbor Tours, okay, so that's accounted for. Most of those tickets are given to the port. The 2 marinas call me on a regular basis and say I'm out of coupons. Can you bring me coupons? So the point I'm making is that foot ferry is a benefit to the people who are in the marinas.
So if they play hardball with this, then potentially they aren't gonna get the coupons any longer.
Yeah, well, and I don't know if POBSA is doing that again next, but they've done it the last 2 years.
I know exactly what Councilman Cartwright is saying, because we have gotten definitely mixed messages from this one commissioner, and depending which way you listen to him, he'll say he thinks someone else will pay for it, but he will still fund it. That's what he did the last couple of years.
That's why I just said I'm sure I wouldn't count on it until we see the check.
He likes to complain.
The signature. Yep.
I think you have that direction.
Yeah, I guess we have to rely.
I realize that, yes, I think she does. I think what I'm hearing, correct me if I've heard different, but we're going to pursue option B. We're going to, is that pretty much where everybody's at?
We need to have a conversation. That's what we're recommending, and we want to know what our partners think.
All right,
That's how I
She'll be
frame it.
back on Monday, and I'll talk to her, and we'll see if we can get some kind of an answer, because we also need to start printing up schedules and things for that.
Can't tell you how
right.
hard it is to sit here with my mouth shut.
All right, for the good of the order, anything? Seeing none, then we're